sent a box home of things that were her handwritten letters and whatevers that I thought might have a trace. And in the last box,
Of course.
I opened, there was a handwritten letter to Friar somebody in Arkansas, and it said, I'm going to write a book, and it's going to be called Storybook Mountain, based on, similar to Thomas Merton's 7-Story Mountain. So that was the beginning, and so I bought his book to kind of get a sense of what that was about, and proceeded to tell a lot of history, used a lot of her handwritten letters and blah blahs. Anyway, so that was my first book, and that was just to meet a request from a loved one. And this book, so differently, I had a manuscript 20 some odd years ago. And it had no structure. It was a bunch of gobbledygook, but stuff that was important to me. But finally, I just let that go. My husband died, I moved to Texas, and my life changed. Well, during the pandemic, March of 2020, I was just pondering, here I am at home, what am I going to do? And I looked in the corner, and there were boxes and boxes of my journals and dream journals that I'd written for 30 years. And I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with these journals? Do I need to burn them? What am I going to do with them? And so I started going through the journals, and I lined them all up by year and made a sequence. And I began to peer through those journals, and there were some amazing dreams I had had that were really pivotal in my life. And there were stories about relationships, and I thought, oh boy, I better figure out what to keep and what not to keep. But I created a spreadsheet sequentially of things that were important to me as I sifted excuse me, through the journals. And it dawned on me, I was being pulled. It was like, maybe now's the time to complete or redo that manuscript you started so many years ago. And that's where it started. And so I came up with a structure, these 6 dimensions, and that became the framework to write the book. So a little bit about me, I grew up in the Texas Panhandle, and I had a very overprotected, loving father. But man, I couldn't do anything without a grandmother with me, or I couldn't go to the drugstore. He protected me till I felt, I was naive. I grew up in this bubble of naivete because I didn't know anything beyond my small world. So I say I grew up gradually and suddenly because there were some things that happened in my life that were huge, like woke me up, stunned me, took me out of my not knowing. And for instance, books were my best friend because I was so overprotected, that's where I went. I lived in my imagination and dream world. And I remember reading Gone with the Wind when I was like 10, 2 or 3 times. It was just this drama I could be in the middle of. But what I noticed about myself was I was both Scarlett and Melanie. I had that night, I could relate to Melanie because she was just pure. I mean, she just didn't know. But Scarlett was big and loud and knew what she wanted, headstrong. I also had that part of me. I remember growing up and I always wanted the last word with my daddy, and he'd be saying, now you need to do this, and I'd be like, no, I won't, no, I won't. And here came the belt, like trying to contain me. And I remember my brothers under the bed saying, just shut up, Duane, just shut up. But something wanted to come out of me. Something was pulling me forward. And I'll tell one story that's in the book about my naivete. I'll read it, but I'll just tell it. I was at Midwestern University in Tulsa. I took a class at a time because I was a young mother and my husband was going full-time. I was going when I could. And on the way to my final exam for speech class, I went in this big room, and it was a hot summer day, and I started sweating and worrying, and this grade for this speech was going to be 60% of our semester grade, and we had to do an impromptu speech. So when it was my turn, I reached in the jar and drew out the topic, moonshine in the cellar. And I thought, oh, that's intriguing. So I began to paint this picture of a dark basement with a young enamored couple coming in to find some space for themselves. And here they are in this basement, and the moon shining through the windows, and there's ivy on the wall. And in the room, which was nearly all boys, there were Snickers. And I thought, I'm getting warmed up. I better keep going. So I began to unravel this story and the big kiss at the end, and there were guffaw. And then I saw the timing thing, like you got 10 seconds, and I began to wind down. But when I finished, they were all laughing. And I thought, well. And I went over to the professor, and he handed me my grade, which was an A+, and he said to me, "You really don't know what moonshine is, do you?" And it was like, oh, there's more to this story than I know. But instead of feeling bad about it, I looked at that A+ and went, it's okay to not know. I can just let it be. Now I know there's more to the story. And that became this thing that happened throughout my life. My naivete, where most people saw that as a weakness or felt sorry for me or wanted to give some excuse about why I didn't understand the world, I just let it be because it stimulated me thinking, oh, there's more I want to know about. And it's okay to go into that not knowing. It's okay. So anyway, that began to unfold in my life. And when I decided to do this book, the thing that came to me looking back over my life were the dimensions that I came up with. And it was about willingness and ability. So being willing for something to happen and then continuing to increase the competence or the capability. So for instance, dimension 1 is about being willing and to really embrace more about who I was. I didn't have a clue. I was this overprotected, naive young woman who didn't have a job until I was in my 30s. Because I was a young mother, that was a full-time job, that's what I did, and I loved it. But I ended up doing about 6 or 7 careers because staying at home and having babies, and then that was boring, so I volunteered at church, and then that wasn't enough. I taught Bible school and blah, 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 and blah. And then I wanted more, and the kids grew up into school, so I created a preschool because there was none. And I was involved in the PTA, and then I was, so things kept going. And eventually, I was divorced, had 3 kids, had never had a job, and I decided that it was time. I need to get a job. I had to pay my way, start supporting myself. So I was hired by a woman who gave me a chance. She's still my friend in Tulsa after 40 years or whatever it's been. But another sense of my vulnerability was I wasn't skilled except I knew typing really well. I could do admin stuff. But one day I was at work and I went to lunch and I'd gotten something on my crisp blouse, how we wore those suits and kept everything. Anyway, so I was back at the office and I had water and I was trying to get this out of my shirt. And the woman who hired me, whose name was Judy, her teenage daughter stopped by to see her. And they popped in my office and I was rubbing on my shirt, and the little girl, who was she must have been drivable, she was probably 16, she came in and she said, well, just shout it out. I did not know there was a product called Shout It Out. And I looked down at my blouse and went, "Get out of there!" So it was another one of those. This young girl, she looked at her mother like, "You hired this one? What is that about?" But those things kept unfolding for me, and so I began to say, "Who am I? What is going on that I need to find out who I am?" Because I didn't have a clue. So that was the first thing that I began to do throughout my life, was to find out who I was. And that's a whole story, because my belief is we keep unfolding layers of who we are. That we have a core essence. Jerry has this ability to sing and make music, and that's who he is, and he lives that. I didn't have that. I didn't know. What was I, what am I about? And so I just kept doing some personal development work and letting things sort of unfold as they would. And before I knew it, I was in a castle one day. I was in a castle outside of Edinburgh, Scotland, with a group of men. And I'm in this castle, the old walls and these men who had this brogue I could hardly understand. And I looked at them and said, "I don't know how I got here." How did this little girl from Texas, who didn't know how to dream for herself, I only reveled in other people's stories, how did I end up here? How is that possible? And then I began just to settle in and become the channel to work with these men for the leadership I was there to teach. But those are the leaps. I look back and there were these leaps. And then I had, at the time I was doing this international work with CEOs and Fortune 100 companies, they kept saying to me at the end of our time together, "Why is it at the top of my career, I'm just now finding out who I am? Who am I?" And that was another thread that made me want to know more about who I was. And so I began to explore these archetypes. And, young kids, they can be Superman or Wonder Woman or anybody they want. They can be it. They are in it, and they can be who they are. And I decided, well, maybe I need to look at some archetypes and see what fits, which characteristics are part of who I am. And I wanted to be the goddess, and I thought, well, I want to be a high priestess. So I began saying, well, what would that look like? Well, what would the gypsy look like? Because I love to dance and play and have fun. What would the warrior look like? And it was that great story of, so I was internationally doing this work, and the day before his 52nd birthday, my husband dies, and I'm traveling. Now what? Now what? It was another leap I had to take. I had to find out more, and that led me into the warrior archetype, because he had been a warrior, and in my mind, I had disdained, can't you just be more quiet and more peaceful, and can't you just kind of, be more accepting of things instead of always making things happen? And in my heart and in my head, I was making him wrong for who he was. And it affected our marriage. And so one day I thought, you know what, this is not about him, this is about me. And I went to the downtown library, and I went through the library, and I found 10 or 15 books about warriors. There were samurai warriors, there were all these different kinds of warriors. I found out that kamikaze was about blowing in the wind, about the wind, a different kind of, which to me represented a spirit, something they did it on purpose. And so I began to make lists of words and characteristics that I could accept about warriors. And I did that, and I tucked him in my heart, and I went home, and every time I looked at him, I pulled up one of those characteristics and just went, I see that in you. I I see that in you. It changed everything. And he never knew what I had done. So when he died, the day before his 52nd birthday, I was called to pull out my warrior. And so thankfully, because I had found ways of characteristics that made sense to me, I began to embody some of those characteristics. And that got me through. This was my second marriage, and his sons sued me. So I needed to be the warrior, not fight, but just be in take on some kind of different sense of myself that I could do this without fighting. I could find a way through without battling my way. And so that was another leap. And when I was doing the international work, I was going through tremendous change. While we were working with these CEOs up here, I was finding out who I was. So there was this dance going on, and it made, I guess, some kind of an entryway, an opening for these 99% men to find out more about who they were and what they wanted, rather than what they had made happen. Because most of them had clawed their way, anyway, that was a different story. So that was both the gradual and the sudden way to write the book, and one the dimensions are about claiming a willingness to find out who you are, to get your voice to match who you are, like Jerry does. His voice matches all the essence of who he is as this creator, musician, storyteller, and these are what I used to look for. Who's doing it in a way that I can find out how I fit in my own life? I was working with some engineers at Motorola in Florida, and it was one of the only female executives I had ever worked with. She was an executive female vice president for Motorola in Fort Lauderdale, and she hired me to come in because she had Hispanic, Persian, she had this myriad diversity in her team, but they could not communicate and get on the same page. They couldn't understand each other. So I was brought in to work with that. And I stayed at a little place every month for a year on a beach, a little private beach in Fort Lauderdale. And I would ask the executives to come to me. And we would walk the beach or sit on the beach and look at the ocean and have our coaching session. And so Ellen came and we were walking on the beach one day, and I said, Ellen, if you were an animal, who would you be with your team? And she said, I'm a sheepherder. I just try to keep everybody in line and get them over to the gate to make sure they're all there. And is it working? No, it's not working for me. They don't like to be herded. Okay. Well, a little while later, a different day, she came and I said, so Ellen, who are you at home? What animal would you describe yourself as at home? And she said, oh, I'm an exotic cat. I love to sit by the fireplace and just be all by myself and just relax. And from that statement, we began to work on how she could integrate who she was in the workplace. And it changed everything. And at the same time, I was working with each one of her direct reports. And so at the end of our time together, come on in. At the end of our time together, everything changed. And I created this big party at the beach for all the wives and spouses and partners to come to see who they'd been hanging out with at the beach on a regular basis. But those are stories that helped inform who I was and create a yearning, a longing to be more of who I am. And I have to say that after all the careers and owning a shop in Wimberley for nearly 15 years, there was a piece of learning I needed more of before it was time to write this book. Because I needed to be responsible and be able to keep payroll going and product coming in and get through a recession before it was like I needed to cook more. I needed to be more of who I was before I was ready to tell my stories. So that's really the basis of it all. And I worked with a Peruvian shaman, and I worked with a lot of self-development. Jean Houston, who was the worldwide storyteller of myth, Joseph Campbell, all those people were influential in my life. So that's why. And then when this weird thing happened, and someone called me and said, we want you to be on the cover of, we want to do a feature story of you. And I'm like, why? What? But what I know is that this was a signal to me that finally in my life, I get to be all of who I am. People don't know me with drums and sitting and doing ceremony and all that, but it's part of who I am. And now I get to be that. I don't just sit on boards and make decisions in this community. I get to be who I am. And that's why it's important for me to move forward and do some more work with workshops and other things in my life. So that's it. Any questions? Since you haven't read the book, or curiosities, or is that, are you surprised, Jerry?
Well, it's finally glad to realize who you are.
Yeah.
And I have a personal story. In October 2020, I was sitting with Joanne and working a job I felt miserable about. And through her wisdom, I'm going to tell you the exact words she said, but it was like, why aren't you doing what you really wanted to do for 20 years? And this book is about not only your journey, but I think there's so much of you sharing for other people to get them started on a journey for themselves. And within 30 days, I quit that miserable job, and the last year and 2 months, I've probably been happier than ever doing what I was supposed to be doing for a long time. And so that's why I'm here today, to support you, Joanne, because
Thank
you made such a difference in my life.
So anyway, that's it. And I've always been enamored with and blown away by older women in my life. So this workshop that's coming up is with Marge Barlow, who is 92. She wrote at least 2 books. One was The Possible Woman, and she wrote it 40 years ago. And she traveled with that story all over on cruises and all around the world. And after reading my book, she asked me if I would do a workshop with her. And it has just stimulated, she's like this mirror of me. And I get to see someone who's still vibrant at 92, who has this wisdom that needs to be shared. And it really is about pulling the wisdom from others. Everybody has that seed of wisdom. And we just want, she and I both are wanting to pull that out of people so they can live in this time that is really crazy. So that's it. That's it. Thank you, Jerry, for
That was great. Yeah.
letting me pull you in.
No, it was wonderful. Glad you did.